Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for November 18th, 2021. I received an email from someone the other day who asked me if I could comment on the question of, is there an evil conspiracy that's being run against the population, or is it just plain idiocy, or perhaps a combination of both? I want to discuss that today because I think many of you are aware that the people who made mistake after mistake, whether it's endless wars, whether it's the attempt to impose a Malthusian genocidal energy policy, these same mistakes are made over and over, and yet the people who make the mistakes remain in positions of influence and power. And I want to take up two examples of this to highlight the problem, because I think what you can find is, as opposed to the idea of a conspiracy, you actually do have networks and corporate cartels and finance and big pharma and energy and so on who make decisions, who roll out the money that politicians need to get elected, and therefore have an undue influence on the decisions that are made. But you also have a problem with the breakdown of education, breakdown of common sense, an immorality, which makes people indifferent to the suffering of others as long as they themselves can find a bit of security. And so, in a sense, it is a breakdown of the whole civilization, a systemic collapse, as Lyndon LaRouche warned about at the end of the Cold War when the Soviet Empire collapsed. He said, if the West doesn't change its policies, we will soon go through the same thing. And I think that's what we're seeing today. Let's take the question of energy. We just saw the fiasco of the Flop 26 conference, the attempt to hammer the world over the head with the idea that your consumption of energy and of food and meat is causing global warming, and therefore you have to cut it back. You have to scale it back. We have to get away from efficient and scientifically valid forms of production and instead go to inefficient, useless, in a sense, old technologies such as wind and then solar, electric cars, and so on. At the same time, we see a hyperinflation. Now, the two of them are related, especially when it comes to energy prices. If you have a policy which deliberately disinvests in energy production, in energy exploration, and instead invests money in programs that are inefficient, and that in effect are costly because you need to subsidize them, but they don't provide enough electricity in any case, what's going to be the result? Now add to that what's happening on the Poland-Belarus border, which whoever wants to blame Russia or Belarus is missing the point. There's a global refugee crisis because of the systemic breakdown. People are starving in parts of the world. There are nations that have been destroyed by wars, most of which were initiated by governments in the transatlantic region, especially the US and the British, with NATO as a backup for that. These are driving people out of countries. Once those wars are carried out, governments of those countries are then sanctioned, as in the case of Syria today. And what does that do? It increases the misery of the population, impelling more of them to migrate, to leave their country and look for a safe place to go. Now, once that happens, it becomes a ticking time bomb. And so you have this charge now that Belarus, President Lukashenko, who they claim was illegitimately reelected, and Russian President Putin, who of course is responsible for everything bad in the world. If your dog is pregnant, blame Putin. Well, supposedly the two of them are conspiring to do something bad to Europe. And now what we're told is that they're going to hold Europe hostage over energy supplies. Now what happened is that because the EU wouldn't talk to Lukashenko, he warned that if they continue to impose sanctions, Belarus may withhold some of the gas that is pumped through their land. Merkel and he have had two conversations in the last 2 days where they're trying to resolve this. But at the same time, the European Union imposed new sanctions on Belarus. So the Belarus authorities decided to take a 3-day hiatus to repair their pipeline. So there's no gas coming into Western Europe from Belarus. At the same time, the European Union and Germany refused to certify the gas going through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia, meaning that that gas is not available. So what happened? Gas prices went up on the spot markets 18% on Tuesday and another 5% yesterday, making utility costs prohibitive for many people in countries like Germany. And what's the effect of this? Is this going to stop the border crisis, the migration crisis? If you want to stop those things, stop the wars and start rebuilding the countries that have been destroyed. Instead, who pays the cost for this? The people in Europe, the citizens, the average guy who has nothing to do with this. The oil companies aren't hurt. The speculators make a huge profit. And so what we're seeing is another side effect is the drive up of energy prices means that the use of fossil fuels becomes less attractive because the costs go up. So it's a package designed for what? To benefit a fake scientific conception of global warming at the expense of the living standard of people, and in fact, in many cases, the ability to survive of people who have no desire other than to improve their living standard. So when you look at this, you see the insanity, but also the evil intent. Now, let me just give you another case, a second example. There's a very good article published by Matt Taibbi on his blog page on Substack yesterday called "The Russiagate Whitewash Era Begins." And he's raising the question of why is there no accountability for the fact that the media repeatedly published stories about Putin and Russia interference, Putin and Trump collusion, that were not only false, but were intended to destroy the Trump administration. Now, he writes the following about this, because he said now they're looking for scapegoats, who to blame. And he said that Danchenko, who was just indicted by Durham, who lied to the FBI, he's one of the sources for the Christopher Steele report, but the FBI knew it was a phony report, they knew it was false, and they still used it to get FISA warrants to spy on the Trump campaign. And there's a lot more that's coming out from Durham, and hopefully there'll be a lot more still to come. But what's the media doing? Well, here's what Taibbi writes. He said that the media who promoted Russiagate for more than 4 years are blaming Danchenko, who is being set up to take the rap as the dirty Russian rat who hoodwinked poor civic-minded Christopher Steele, the FBI, and the entire American press corps into propping up the biggest hoax since the weapons of mass destruction affair. That's a quote from Taibbi's article. And we're seeing exactly that. Has Rachel Maddow had to apologize for her repeated lies about Russiagate? What about Representative Adam Schiff? On the one side, you see the whole Congress moving against Paul Gosar, who made a very stupid act in threatening AOC and the president. But what about Adam Schiff, who repeatedly pushed a lie and is still pushing that lie, as he did in NBC Meet the Press on Sunday, talking to Chuck Todd when he said there was Russian interference in the U.S. election, and he still stands by that. Now, why is it that they can get away with that? I mean, on the one side, who owns the media? The media is another cartel, the mainstream media. And they're pushing the anti-Russia line, anti-Trump line, because they don't want a repair of U.S.-Russian relations. They don't want U.S.-China relations to get on a sound footing. They're committed to the British geopolitical strategy of divide and conquer. At the same time, they're pushing for a globalization policy, which might be called a world government, in which you have an entity run by corporate cartels controlling economic policy for every nation on the earth. That is evil. And that's something that is scripted. That's something that's been discussed at think tanks from the Atlantic Council to Chatham House to the Council on Foreign Relations, the Heritage Foundation, whether it's left or right, they're all in this on some way. And when you say, well, no, the conservatives are not, they're for free trade, therefore ending these kinds of policies, what does free trade do? It gives the power to the biggest corporations. So we're under siege from corporate cartels, trusts who act for their interests. At this point, they're bankrupt, but they still control the levers of power. And so instead of just ranting and raving about this politician or that politician, look at the problem. It's the system. We have to fix the system. And tomorrow, I'll take some questions, but I'm also going to go through how the LaRouche movement has consistently been ahead of the curve in presenting the solutions to these problems. So join me tomorrow. If you have a question for me, you can always send it to me at harleysch@gmail.com.